Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today we'll be talking about 5 of my favorite budget-friendly training shoes. So all 5 of these models cost around $100 or less. You can typically find them marked down depending on the colorway you go with, and if you search around for coupons too. And for all of these shoes, I spent around like $60 to $80, give or take. Now, that said, before you go and look into these shoes, because everything is timestamped down below, make sure you always look at the more premium training shoes from different companies and their past iterations. Typically, you can find past iterations marked down, so you can typically find a really good premium training shoe for $100 or less if you just do some digging. So that said, let's dive in to my top 5 picks. So my favorite overall pick in this video is the Mizuno TS-01, and never in a million years would I have thought I'd be telling you that my favorite training shoe in a roundup is a Mizuno training shoe, but the TS-01 costs around $105. Now, if you sign up for their email list or if you search around for coupons, I am fairly confident you can knock that price down. So it is a little bit more than $100, but bear with me because you can typically get this for less. And with the Mizuno TS-01, how are you going to want to use this shoe? You want to use a shoe if you're more of an athlete and you train in a dynamic fashion. So if you're lifting, jumping, doing HIIT, etc., that's where the TS-01 is going to excel the most. Now, 3 pros that I have with the TS-01 is number 1, I like the COB tech in the forefoot and how maneuverable the forefoot is. So if you like more flexible training shoes, this will be a great option to look into. With the COB tech, it's like this bumpier texture that you feel on the forefoot of the shoe. It's essentially designed to give you more proprioception. It's called their center of balance tech, and you can feel it, and I like the way it moves with the foot when you're training. So if you love flexible training shoes, the TS-01 will vibe with you. The second pro that I have with this shoe is it has a really good level of stability with this midsole for training. And now, why I also like this is outside of it having stability for heavy lifting, you also get a good amount of ground feel with this lower stack height and this density of this midsole. It walks that fine line between being plush enough to where it's not overly uncomfortable for jumping and sprinting, but dense enough to train with. So if you are somebody that likes more ground feel with your training shoes and you just want a denser midsole so you can really feel that ground when you're doing plyos, sprints, etc., you'll also like this model. The third thing to like about this shoe is the upper construction and the level of security that you get with this model. So with this shoe, I have yet to have any spillover issues. You have some lateral and medial reinforcement here on the midfoot, and the boot back here has a bit of structure. So whether you're doing lateral work or multi-directional work and whatnot, I don't think upper security is going to be an issue in this model whatsoever. Now, 2 cons that I have with the shoe. Number 1, it's not going to be your most comfortable shoe for running. So if you do need that training shoe that can work for hybrid workouts, this is not going to be your best bet. The heel back here can feel a little bit abrupt at times. Now, if you are a forefoot or midfoot striker, I wouldn't necessarily worry about this, but again, the heel can be a little bit off-putting. And then the second con that I could see folks having with the shoe is it doesn't have the widest midfoot. So if you have a flatter foot or an exceptionally wide foot, you'll also want to steer clear of the TS-01 because I think it's going to feel a little bit narrow and a little bit too arch heavy for your foot needs. The next shoe I want to cover is the Adidas Rapidmove. So this model costs around like $80 to $100 depending on the colorway that you go with. I found this model on sale. This was an offset colorway that I guess wasn't selling as well, so I paid around $75 on these when all is said and done. Now, when would you want to use this shoe? If you have a class or HIIT bias and you do some moderate strength work, that's where this shoe is going to excel. It's a little bit more plush compared to the Nanoflex V2 and the Mizuno TS-01 I just talked about. Now, 3 pros that I have with the Rapidmove is number 1, it has a wider platform here with its sole construction. So if you like having a wider base to train on and you're doing a lot of lateral work or a lot of explosive work, this can be a really good option to look into. I really enjoyed doing like skater strides and any form of lateral plyo in this model because the sole does have a nice wide base, the outsole has good grip, and it felt like I had a nice platform to jump and train and land on. The second pro that I have with the shoe is the midsole construction and how plush it feels. So with this model, it is comfortable enough to tack on a couple of miles, and the forefoot feels pretty comfortable with giving you a nice level of bounce. So you do get a nice responsive feel with this foam. It's a little bit more plush than the other models, again, discussed in this video prior, and it's going to be more plush than the models like the Dropset Trainer 2, which is the more lifting and cross-training focus model from Adidas. So if you do like a plusher ride with your training shoes, this can be a good option to look into. And again, this midsole will be dense enough to do some heavier training in. Like I have trained up to 455 pounds in this model, and it worked. Was it the most stable? Not necessarily, but I think for most folks, especially beginners who just want that shoe for some moderate strength sessions or they're just getting into strength workouts, this model will be plenty fine for their needs. And the third pro that I have with this model is the upper construction. So the upper of the shoe locks your foot down pretty well. So again, if you are doing lateral work, this upper should do a good job of giving you a nice nice level of security, which is good because we do have a wider platform. If we had a bunch of spillover in a wide platform, wouldn't make a whole lot of sense here. Now, two cons that I have with this shoe. I do wish the upper had a bit more breathability. This upper doesn't breathe the best in the forefoot, so if you're wearing thicker socks and you're in a hotter class setting, this shoe can run a little bit warm at times in my opinion. And the second con that I have with this shoe is the laces can awkwardly run a little bit long and the tongue itself is not gusseted, so it can slide at times. It's one of those little annoying things that I'm just kind of OCD about. It's not always the biggest issue if you tighten these up really well and if you double knot the laces, but again, you may have to do some finessing up here with the laces and the tongue when you are lacing them up before you go train to get that tongue nice and secure and to lay flat on the foot without it moving when you are training. The next model I want to cover is the Under Armour Project Rock BSR 4. So this model costs around $100 and you can often find them marked down because Under Armour typically has coupons floating around, or you could sign up for their email list and you could typically get, I think, 10 to 15% off. Don't quote me on that because it has been a minute since I've had to sign up for their email list. I usually do my sleuthing for coupons. Now with the BSR 4, 3 things to like about this shoe. I really like the Reebok upper construction in this model. So in the prior 3 BSR models, one of my complaints was always that they felt kind of chunky on the feet. Now this model still feels chunky and I'll talk about that in my cons. However, the upper in this shoe has been made to be a little bit more form-fitting for the foot, so it does give it a slightly more pliable feel. Is it gonna feel uber pliable and uber flexible? Not necessarily, but in the context of the other BSR models, this is the most mobile model yet, which I personally like, and the upper construction tweak is why I think it feels this way. The second pro that I have with this shoe is the charge cushioning midsole. So with this midsole, you get a nice level of responsiveness and stability. And so if you are that person that goes to the gym and you do some jumping, you do some short runs, you do some lifting, so you just like to do a little bit of everything, you're more of that recreational lifter, this model can be a really good bet to look into. It's going to give you a nice level of stability, and there's not so much toe spring in it to where it almost shifts you forward all the time when you're training, despite it having a chunkier midsole here. So for the most part, the charge cushioning midsole has done a really good job at accommodating all of my needs in the gym. The third pro that I have with this model is the tri-base tech on the outsole. So I personally love that Under Armour left this feature in this model. It gives you a nice base to train on when doing single leg work, for example. I like that this midfoot has a bit more structure to it, and with this full rubber tread patterning, you get a nice level of grip on different surfaces. Now, 2 cons that I have with the BSR 4. Number 1, with this booty style construction, there is not a ton of stretch here. So if you have a high instep, or if you have thick feet, or if you take these off post-workout and you have sweaty feet like I have done, prepare to battle because it is pretty tough to get back on your feet. It's kind of one of these little niche things where I don't think it's going to hinder everybody or annoy everybody, but the folks where this is annoying for, you're gonna feel it and you're gonna be like, gosh dang it, I wish I had more stretch up here. So you might have to play with that a little bit with this model. The second con that I have with this shoe, and I kind of alluded to this in my pros, is that look, the midsole is still pretty dang high regarding its stack height, and it does have a chunkier feel. If you want something more maneuverable and flexible, I would look into the TS-01 or the Rapidmove. Both of those shoes have midsoles that will give you more give and flexibility with the feet, and they'll move better when you're training, because again, even though this model I think is better than the prior 3 BSR shoes, it's still definitely a chunkier shoe, which tends to be the pattern for the Project Rock training shoe line in both the premium and the BSR models. The next shoe I want to cover is the Reebok Nanoflex V2 or TR2. Both of those models are pretty much the same thing. I don't know why they label them differently on the site because it can be a little confusing in my opinion. So this model costs around $80-ish to $90-ish, but they are often marked down pretty dang heavily. For example, I believe they had like a sale that had the shoe down at $40. So while they are still available, I would suggest looking into them if you're trying to spend as little as possible on your shoes. Now, 3 pros that I have with the V2 is number 1, it's a really good do-it-all training shoe. So if you want that training shoe for CrossFit, lifting, versatile workouts, the V2 can be a really good option. It's kind of like the X3, X2, X4's budget-friendly cousin in the sense that it can do a little bit of everything if you need a training shoe for that context. The second pro that I have with this model is the midsole construction. So with the midsole in this model, it breaks in relatively easily and it feels really good for lifting, but then also plyometrics and jumping and sprinting. This midsole is dense enough to give you a nice level of ground feel, and it's also dense enough to support heavy lifts. So with this model, I've trained up to 455 pounds, have never had an issue with stability whatsoever. And so if you are similar with liking a midsole that has a bit more density to it, this can be a great option to look into. The third pro that I have with this model is its overall durability. So for the most part, this shoe tends to last a while. The upper construction is reinforced with synthetic overlay, overlays and mesh overlays. You have a full rubber outsole down here, and you have some TPU clips here on the lateral and medial heel to help give you additional structure from this boot kind of breaking down and folding in. So if you need a shoe that has decent durability for a price point that hovers between like $40 and $80, the Nanoflex V2 can be a really good option to look into. Now, two cons that I have with this shoe. Number one, it does have a bit of an aggressive midfoot arch here, so if you have a flat foot like the TS-01, this model is likely not going to be your best bet. And then the second con with this model is it can feel a little bit clunky at times in the sense of the heel feeling a tad bit blocky. So this model definitely kind of has a more budget-friendly feel to it compared to like the Nano X4 or X3 that have that lift and run chassis system built in. Gives a little bit more of a comfortable ride for running. You're not necessarily going to get that same experience with the Nanoflex V2, so definitely keep that in mind if you are somebody that likes to tack on 2 or 3 miles pre or post workout. This model may fall a little bit short for that context. The final shoe I want to cover is the Nike MC Trainer 2. So this model costs around $70 to $80 depending on the colorway, and this is going to be your best bet for lifting and cross training from Nike if you're trying to save as much as possible. Now, 3 pros that I have with the MC Trainer 2. Number one, if you have a narrower foot, and if you do like a little bit of arch in your shoes, this is going to be your option to go with. This model fits very narrow, and I'm sure you can already guess that one of my cons is the width of this shoe, but for narrow feet, this model fits really well, so I'd highly suggest looking into them. The second pro that I have with the MC Trainer 2 is it's going to be a training shoe with a bias towards lifting. So if you are a beginner, or if you are somebody who is really strapped on your budget and you want something that's stable enough for training, this can be a really good option to look into. With this model's midsole, it has a good level of density. You're not going to have a ton of compression. I've worked up to 455 in this shoe and I haven't had issues. And with this model's midsole, it does break in over time. However, there is a nice level of structure through the midfoot too to help you stay planted when you are lifting. The third pro that I have with this shoe is the full rubber tread patterning and its traction. So whether you're training on rubber gym floors, wooden platforms, or on turf, this can be a really good option to look into. I don't think you're gonna have slip issues. This model has done exceptionally well for all of my needs regarding its traction. Now, 3 cons that I have with this shoe. Number one, it's not gonna be the best bet for wide feet or folks with flat feet who need more width through the midfoot. This model runs exceptionally narrow, so I would highly suggest passing on this shoe, and even if you size up, I'm not convinced you're gonna have enough width in the shoe. The second con that I have with this model is this heel construction. You have a heel that kind of juts out. Now that takes away the shoe's performance and comfort for things like running and longer cross-training sessions where you're doing a lot of jumping or any form of jumping or multi-directional work where you might have heel contact first. It kind of gives the shoe a more clunky and blocky feel, similar to like the Metcon 7, 8, and 9. The third con that I have with this shoe is it's not the most flexible through the midfoot here. So if you like flexibility in your training shoes, go Mizuno TS-01 or Rapidmove. This model here has a lot of structure through the midfoot, so if you like articulation in your training shoes, the MC Trainer 2 might feel a little bit too stiff for your needs. All right guys, hopefully this video gives you some options of training shoes to look into for around $100 if you're on a budget. If you have additional questions on any of these shoes or other shoes that you might want to explore that I didn't list that match your budget needs, drop a comment down below and let me know whatever questions you have, or reach out to me personally on Instagram, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the